Hey there, I'm Heidi, and this video is going to be about some gentle ways that you can help to process and move through some emotions that might come up. And my last video, I was talking about how to tune into your inner voice again, your inner wisdom. If you've been in a place where you felt disconnected or stuck and not really in alignment with things in life. And I mentioned in that video that when you do create those spaces for yourself, those intentional voids for yourself to allow things to come up and feel, sometimes some very intense things can come up. And so I just wanted to speak on that point a little bit in this next video. And I want to say first and foremost, I feel like the thing that has softened emotions the most for me is knowing that everything is okay. You know, everything you feel is okay. And this was a really big one for me because I grew up in my family where it was a very loving environment. You know, I was very supported as a kid. However, there was this feeling of like some of my emotions are not okay. And my mom probably doesn't even remember this, but you know, when I was a teenager, I just remember I just felt such frustration and anger, and I said, you know, Mommy, sometimes I just feel so angry, you know. And I remember her saying to me, oh well, that's not a nice emotion, you know. And like, of course, you know, people say things all the time, and you know, it didn't really mean much by it. Didn't mean like you're not okay or to feel that or something like that. But you know, I feel like at the same time, you know, something like this can really like take hold in someone's consciousness of like, oh, this is not okay. Like I need to push this away or not tell anyone about that, or I shouldn't act like that, you know? And I think in a more general sense, you know, I think for women to really be angry is also in a lot of cultures not really socially accepted, right? It's like, whoa, you know, like hang on there, and there's all these judgments around like she went crazy, you know. I laugh, but you know, I think it's also a very real thing that not allowing yourself to feel certain emotions is going to create tension in the body, full stop. And I don't know if you've ever read Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now. I believe it was in The Power of Now when he was speaking about the pain body. And when I read that book, you know, many years later, I was like, oh my God, this just makes like perfect sense, like why I am the way that I am. And what used to be my pattern was like, I would be like going along, like everything's fine. But really it felt like, you know, there was this like, you know, ticking time bomb of an emotional eruption that could just be set off by the most random things. You know, I could be, I used to live in China. So like, I remember one day going to the visa office and I don't know, there was just some problem with my visa, which isn't a big shocker because, you know, like when isn't there sometimes an issue, you know, you forgot a paper or, you know, there's a new rule, you have to have this or something. And I just remember like breaking down and crying over this like tiny thing. Like I needed an extra document or something from my employer. And I just feel like a crazy person. I'm just like, you know, like then it's like uncontrollable, you know, just, you know, streaming down my face. I'm standing in front of the visa office like, you know, someone has died or I'm getting deported or something. And like, you know, nothing like that has happened. I just have to come back another day. You know, so now I can laugh about this, but, you know, this seemed to be a recurring pattern for me. You know, I would be ignoring my emotions and my body signals all along the way, and then it would just like explode, you know, just like Eckhart Tolle talked about in his book, this pain body. And recently I've been also studying a bit about like hypnosis and neuroscience and these kind of things and how this actually works in the body. And it all makes perfect sense because it's like when the nervous system like tenses up in reaction to an event, and then it's not fully allowed to move through the system as it's naturally designed, you know, then it's literally like stuck tension in the body that it is just like that. Like someone can just, and that it sets off like a supposedly disproportional reaction, but it's not really disproportional because it's proportional to the amount of things that have been like literally like building up in your muscles, in your organs, in your breathing that you've been holding with you that need to have an outlet at some point, right? They need to be let go. So I feel like one of the key things, of course, in an ideal world, you know, we would allow these things to just move through us naturally, like as they come up. Yet, probably, if you're anything like most people, that isn't really the case. And we have a lot of like built up tension and holding on in the body. So that's one thing that can come up when you start to do this kind of inner work, or maybe even when you've been doing it for a long time. I mean, it still comes up for me, right? That something is activated within my system that I didn't even know was there, like some memory or some association. Something comes up in the external world that reminds you of a past negative experience in your life and just sets off these emotions. So, again, whether it's activating an old hurt within you, or if it's a new thing that has come up, you know, some reaction or frustration with the external, I feel like the key part is always being with that thing, you know. And I'm now taking a deep breath because I feel like I got really into the emotion of telling that story, you know. And the simplest way, you know, like one of my original spiritual teachers back in Shanghai, my teacher Glenn, who was a network chiropractic practitioner, you know, he said, really, he always just tells people to breathe into the discomfort. And it sounds so simple, but it's like that's not how kind of most knee-jerk reactions happen. You know, it's like, oh, there's an uncomfortable feeling. A lot of people will just hold their breath, right? You know, and I don't know if you've noticed that within yourself. But it's kind of like, you know, maybe it's that kind of reaction like I was referencing when I was a kid of like, oh no, I feel angry. Like this is not okay for me to be feeling. So I need to like hold myself together, literally. You know, there's a reason why we have these figures of speech. Rather than, you know, actually just feeling the emotion, you know, and like animals, you know, if they're kind of stressed or traumatized or something, you know, they just shake, right? And this is kind of a foundational concept in TRE therapy. I don't know if you've ever tried that, but it's basically you kind of like induce a shaking in your, I don't know if it's like your hip flexors. I'm not an expert on that, but I've done this therapy several times in Chiang Mai, and I found it really amazing, like the amount of things that you can release. It's kind of just like releasing held up tension, but without really knowing what it is, or, you know, having to like name something specific that you're letting go of. It's just kind of in general letting go of held tension in your body, and sometimes you can just kind of start crying for no particular reason and things like that because of these kind of feelings that can be held in the nervous system that can then trigger the emotional reaction, right, when you're in a session like this. So I guess mainly I want to talk about, you know, processing in your own space, because of course if you're like in a public space, sometimes it's like there is that sense of I need to hold myself together right now, and maybe like process later or something. But ideally, you know, not, like now what I would do if like I am feeling in a place of being really overwhelmed or stressed, like, you know, say I'm at the airport and I haven't slept and I'm feeling a bit anxious, I will literally go to the bathroom and use some of my nervous system tools, you know, like even just kind of like squeezing both of your arms. Like this makes me feel really like grounded and safe. And also it has the bilateral stimulation element, you know, where you're stimulating both parts of your brain, and that kind of calms down the emotion and brings you back into balance, right? So I like this motion because it has that effect, and it has kind of maybe it's activating the blood flow, or I don't know what it is, or it's you know, like a little bit of giving yourself like a self hug, like I'm here, I'm okay, it's okay what you're feeling, and this is never to like get rid of the emotion. I think that's another thing that can subtly create like another form of tension, is like, oh, like I don't like this emotion, I want to get rid of it as fast as possible, which in itself is kind of perpetuating a feeling of tension, and I would rather recommend thinking of it as like moving with the emotion and like allowing it to pass through your system. And another tool that I learned from my teacher Melissa Tears is just a very simple, you take some object, like could be this pen or whatever object you have. Actually, maybe this is nicer because it's a little bit heavier. My headphones, and if you're feeling in a frazzled space, or there's like a lot of emotion where you feel overwhelmed, and like the emotion is like taking control of you, right? So to come back to yourself and be with the emotion, right? We're not trying to get rid of it. We're just trying to also make space for the whole rest of us and not get completely consumed. You can take something in your hand like this and just pass it back and forth. And take a deep breath. And you can even double that with kind of like focusing on something in your environment, and reminding yourself that you're still here and it's okay. And maybe that emotion is still very alive at the same time, right? Maybe it's still raging, or other thoughts are coming through, and that's okay, right? And you can do this for as long as you need to just make that extra space. Again, making space for the emotion and bringing your whole being back online, right? To hold that in a different way and allow that to pass through. I feel like another way that has really worked well for me recently is to just kind of do something mundane while not in any way trying to delete the emotion or make it go away fast, because I think maybe there's this kind of fear, and I think this is like an idea that I've heard like in multiple ways in kind of the spiritual world too, is like, oh, negative emotions somehow can like mess up your vibe, right? And I think in a lot of ways this is kind of like a toxic positivity sort of concept, to where they're not making a distinction between like an emotion in the moment, which is real, and it's there giving you some sort of information. It's also important. It's not something that's like bad and you have to like get rid of right away because it's going to mess up your day and mess up your vibe. And making a distinction between that and like attaching to emotional stories, right? And I think that has the ability to, of course, take your life off track. If it's like, you're feeling emotions and then you're focusing on that and then going into stories, and that creates like this perpetuating negativity loop. Like that's a very different thing than really being with your emotions in the present moment. So like I remember there was this situation recently where like something just really pissed me off. Like let me put it in that way. And that hasn't really happened in that way in a really long time. And I just felt like, just like this fiery anger, just like all over my body, and I was like, okay, instead of like thinking about this or trying to do something to get rid of this, I'm just going to do the dishes and I'm just going to like feel this, for the moment. And I think I was even having a conversation with my boyfriend at the same time. And it was so interesting how I was able to make space for the mundane activity of like washing the dishes. And I'm responding, he was asking me some questions, I'm writing back. And at the same time, there's this like emotion just like passing through me. And I was like, wow, that is so interesting. How all of these things can be here at the same time. And I don't need to make it mean anything crazy or actually, I don't need to make it mean anything, right? It can just be there. And then after a few minutes of that, I almost felt like, I can use this to fuel me. And not in the sense of like, I'm going to take this and throw it back at the situation or the person, that like, did this or whatever. And it's not like anyone did this. It's just the situation, but I was like kind of imagining, like just breathing into this energy and like letting it pass through me and letting it fuel me at the same time. So this is not something that's harming me. It's something that is valuable in and of itself. And I felt like that really helped me to kind of find my power again in that situation. And I'm not saying I perfectly responded to that because that's a subject for another story. But I feel like again and again, it's coming back to this idea of it's okay. Everything's okay. And this emotion, that emotion, it's just one part, right? It's just one experience that's moving through. And remembering that, you realize actually that your being, your space, the different parts of you are so much more than this one thing that's happening in the moment. And there's no need to be afraid of emotions or necessarily go into a story about each one. Like I just cried even just today, like, and it was coming through, and my partner was like, oh, he's very supportive, like, what's going on? Like, can you talk about it? And I just said, actually, I don't know. And I just need to allow this to come through me. I don't know what it is, actually, genuinely. I'm not like playing a game, like, I don't know what's wrong. Sometimes emotions just come through and they don't need to mean anything. And sometimes they are maybe attached to a situation and they do mean something, but all of it is okay and all of it can move through, especially if you allow yourself to be in a more expanded space with all the different parts of you, and especially being in the present moment with yourself and being able to just feel everything and knowing that in that extra space that you're allowing for it, it's going to be able to move through so much faster, even though I want to say it doesn't have to be fast. You can just be with that emotion. So that's all for today. And let me know if you have any further questions or experiences you'd like to share in the comments. And I'd love to also hear if you have any ideas of questions that you have for me. I would love to answer those. So have a beautiful day and talk soon.